All right. Third Act Lawyers Webinar Take Two. My name is Bob Sang. I am introducing Grant Wilson, our featured guest for tonight. And I am going to paraphrase from his biography on the Earth Law Center website. Grant, as I mentioned, is the executive director. His expertise is in the rights of nature, ecocentric law, and environmental law. He is a co-lead editor of the Earth Law textbook, Earth Law, Emerging Ecocentric Law, a guide for practitioners. He's a member of the World Commission on Environmental Law and the UN Harmony with Nature Initiative. Grant earned a JD and a certificate in environmental law and natural resources law from Lewis and Clark Law School. Grant, welcome.
Hey, great to be here, Bob. Thanks for having me.
And we are happy to have you here. Now, we don't have an enormous group tonight, so we might have some opportunity to kind of bend the rules and do some give and take. But let's you and I sort of launch into things, and we will see how this goes. And I did mention to you that I would like to start with you giving us, 90 seconds on Grant. So take it away.
Sure thing. So, Grant Wilson, I call myself an earth lawyer because I represent nature very directly as a legal professional. I'm the executive director of Earth Law Center, and basically what we do is work to give nature a voice in the legal system. This means nature having its own rights, just like humans and corporations have rights. This means creating legal guardians who speak for nature, just like a child might have a legal guardian. And this means advancing all sorts of other innovative campaigns from local governments to international agencies to really harmonize human laws with the laws of nature. So
Good.
we've
And we're going to jump into all of that. Tell me also, you started your tenure with Earth Law Center as their first lawyer, I think, right? How long ago?
I was the first staff lawyer hired all the way back in 2014, so over a decade now.
Mhm.
And we were a couple of us back then, kind of ragtag team doing great work, hard on our sleeves type of stuff. And now we've really grown into a full-fledged law and policy firm with about 15 staff all over the world.
And headquartered in Durango, Colorado, correct?
Ordered in Durango, Colorado. Yeah, we have staff working remotely, but I kind of thought, we could have opened up an office in New York or DC, but I was like, we're the Earth Law Center. We should be surrounded by nature. So we're in this beautiful little town with hot springs and hiking, and we have a lot of folks come in as fellows and interns and spend time in nature while planning different ways the environmental legal system can work better for the planet.
Good, good. Okay, so we're going to dive into all sorts of things in the next 50, 60 minutes. But I think what you and I decided on was you're going to kind of kick this off with a presentation deck that's about 5 slides that you have. Sound good?
Yeah, very short. Don't want to bore anyone. So yeah, let's kick off the 5 slides here. Hold on just a second.
Well, you're doing that. I should say we are thrilled to have Gail Carta on the call here, who is, I'm not sure what her title is, fellow, I think, with the Earth Law Center. And we featured Gail on our website earlier this week. So welcome, Gail, and thanks for joining.
Thank you. I'm International Legal Counsel for EO.
And I cannot live without Gail. I'll talk about the international law a little bit, but there's all these movements at the UN and different treaty bodies to support this idea of giving nature a voice and rights. And Gail's on the forefront of that globally. So good to see you here, Gail. While we're doing shout out to Warren, who was one of our Earth Law Fellows last summer. And I think it was extended the invite here, and we'll talk a little bit about that program later. All right, so giving nature a voice in the legal system. This is just kind of Earth Law Center's mission, but we believe nature and all voiceless entities should be represented in the legal system. And this is, as we all know, as lawyers here, very different than the status quo in which humans have rights and our human created corporations have rights. But nature, rivers, forests, species, the ocean, life really is defined as property under the legal system, and we buy it and sell it and exploit it. And we think it deserves its own rights and voice. And this is kind of very different than endangered species laws, environmental laws, which are very, very helpful at kind of holding the line at reducing the amount of degradation, but oftentimes are sort of emergency room laws, like the species is almost extinct. Let's protect it before it goes extinct. Or, this river is like having this severe amount of pollution. Let's reduce that. But what about the health of the entire watershed? And so, rights of nature work is really about a paradigm shift in treating nature not just as a thing or property, and with some smaller protections, not allowing it to walk over the cliff towards total collapse, to a new paradigm in which nature's health and rights are paramount in our legal system. This is quickly just the different fields we kind of work on. So rights of nature, we're kind of famous for that. Nature has rights. What does that mean? How's it work? But there's other movements that are ecocentric or in alignment with nature that we work on as well. They're all described in our Earth Law course book released in 2021 called Earth Law. So some others are ecocide, the criminalization of nature, animal rights, the rights of future generations, giving rights to those who can't speak for themselves because they're not yet born, human and environmental rights, legal guardianship of nature, actually representing nature as guardians, like a child would have a guardian, and others. So be sure to check out our book, which is being updated this summer. So second edition's coming out next year. I want to just give one quick example of what this looks like in practice, all the stuff I'm talking about. The Marañón River is the major tributary to the Amazon. It's in Peru. It's this beautiful, beautiful river that starts in the peaks of the Andes and flows into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. And there was a case brought by indigenous Kukama woman, pictured there, to protect this river from oil pollution. And as a result of this lawsuit, Earth Law Center supported the lawsuit. The court ruled that this river has rights, like a right to exist, a right to flow, a right to be free from pollution. And it even appointed the cultural guardians, the Kukama indigenous women who have long spoken for the river culturally. It appointed them as the legal guardians of the river, amongst others. So now the river has rights, it has a voice in the legal system, and the court issued a variety of orders to begin to clean up some of this oil pollution that is continuing to devastate aquatic life and the communities that live along the river. So really cool case in Peru, definitely one to look up.
Hey, Grant, I'm going to just take advantage of kind of the small group here that we have and interrupt you a little bit as you go through these slides. That litigation, how many different organizations were involved in supporting the plaintiffs?
Quite a number. There was
Oh.
probably about 6 or 7. A number were like local scientific groups, International Rivers, which is a large group that works to fight dams and ensure clean, healthy rivers. Indigenous-led groups locally. The Kukama Women's Federation is a local organization in the Amazon there. And then, kind of the roles were that the plaintiffs, really brought their cultural connection to the river. And a lot of these rights in nature cases that are winning worldwide right now are brought by folks who are basically, their argument is that we are inseparable from the ecosystem. Like, we are part of the river and the watershed. And so by polluting the river, you're impairing our own rights. And unless you recognize the river's own rights, our own rights as a community can't be enforced. And that was very much the case in this campaign here. And what Earth Law Center does is kind of comes in and we bring in international expertise. We do a lot of work of, how does rights of nature work in practice? What rights does nature have? Who should speak for nature? How do you avoid slippery slope arguments? Like people are worried about a cascade of lawsuits once nature's rights are recognized. And so we're kind of, the law firm that comes in and provides guidance on all those challenging questions that governments and courts might not be familiar with. If, like in this case, it was the country's first rights of nature decision ever in the courts, and there was nothing in the Constitution. And so it was new territory. So that's kind of where we serve an important role in that as well.
Interesting. Okay, fascinating case. All right, what's next?
What's next? I think it's the second to last thing. This is just a little fun chart. So I really like to think that any area of the law can sort of be reimagined in a way that's earth-centered or ecocentric. And part of this was actually inspired from some folks from Third Act last summer that I think I'll talk about more in the presentation a little later on, but who were connected with us and were family lawyers. And I was talking to them and I'm like, I really believe every area of law can be reimagined from an earth-centered perspective. And they were kind of telling me, well, we're family lawyers and, we work in these concepts of quote, the best interest of the child, having to represent the best interest of the child. And I'm like, oh, best interest of nature. That's like an application of, representing the child. Let's represent nature using those same legal philosophies. And then also learning more about guardians ad litem, folks representing children in court cases and the legal system. And you can actually take a law that allows for guardians ad litem to represent children and change the word like child to nature. And you have like a really good law in which lawyers can represent nature directly in the legal system. And I started to dig more and really believe that almost any area of the law can kind of be reimagined for, hey, what if nature's voice and agency was represented in here somehow? So we could talk about all these in length, but rights of nature is a constitutional law approach, essentially. Within corporate law, we've worked to give nature its own board seat in the company for the first time, and now there's other companies replicating this model. This was in the UK. Family law, I mentioned a couple examples, but also many indigenous peoples believe nature is a relative, a river is a relative. The Coast Salish people, the Lummi in particular, believe southern resident orcas are their relatives. So what about using family law to protect nature as a family member? And there's other examples here as well, all of which are fascinating. The crime of ecocide being proposed at the International Criminal Court, and on and on. So one of the cool things about connecting with, third act lawyers is, hey, what'd you do? What was your career in? And how can we think about ways to give nature a voice in that space and different innovative possibilities?
Good. There's a lot here. Okay. Did you have another slide? I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Oh, just the last promotion slide, and then we can dive into some of that stuff maybe.
Great.
This is just to say we have a Earth Law summer course. If at the end of this hour you're hungry for more, I encourage you to check it out, earthlawcenter.org/education. I'm the host and teacher, but there's a lot of guests. Every class has 2 guests. It's 2 classes a week, 2 hours a class for 5 weeks, 20 class hours. All the details are there, and it's a really fun thing. You'll have about 150 to 200 people you'll meet too from all over the world who are interested in this stuff. So you'll be part of a global network at the same time. So with that, I did want to just have a little preview and say a teaser, and then I'll kick it over to you, Bob, and say at the end of the class, I'm going to make a surprise announcement. So make sure to stay till the end because you won't miss it. With that teaser, is that what you call it? You told me, Bob.
Teaser. There's your teaser. That's exactly. You planted it. Good. Okay, there is so much to cover here. I will have to admit that when I first saw the name of your organization, I expected a team of litigators out filing lawsuits, and was intrigued to see that. I mean, while advocacy is a part of your portfolio, you at the Earth Law Center are really playing the long game here in terms of um, pushing for some structural big changes in how our legal systems function vis-a-vis the world. True, false? Talk to me.
Very true, very true. So we do a little litigation, that Marañón River case, what we were helping out in the courts there. But a lot of the stuff we're trying to do, I mean, the holy grail in this space is constitutional amendments. And in 2008, Ecuador became the first and still only country to put rights of nature in its constitution. And so since 2008, that's been, it's like human environmental rights, and all our constitutional rights in this constitution. And, it's about 15, 17 years since then. And we've seen, dozens, over 40 lawsuits defending the rights of nature in practice, many in the constitutional court. And recently, especially big landmark judgments in which, for example, there's a cloud forest in court against a state-owned mining company, and the cloud forest wins because its rights were not considered. And so I think to your question, we're about systemic change, paradigm shifts. And so, if we can pass a constitutional amendment and support that with legal drafting or national law like we did in Panama on the rights of nature, then, lawyers in those countries for generations can enforce those rights and figure out what they mean in practice. So that's a little more our strategy than lots of litigation.
Yeah, okay, so go to the specific for a moment. Just tell me about Panama.
Panama is a cool story because there was this 26-year-old lawmaker. His name's Juan Diego Vasquez Gutierrez, and also a young scientist named Callie Wielenturf living in Panama who protects turtles out there. And she was talking to members of the government in Panama, including Juan Diego, and started talking about the rights of nature. And they were really excited about the idea and kind of proposed a bill. And I mentioned the ages of these people because it was a young, 20-something politician and young scientist and some young Earth Law Center lawyers um, that kind of pushed this forward. And yeah, they put together a draft. They called in Earth Law Center to bring in some of our legal expertise to refine and update that draft and passed it with pretty strong support. And since then, it's been enforced in about 5 court decisions. Just to give an example of what this looks like in practice, one was reviewing a permit for a giant copper mine, and basically they said, doing like damage control through some remediation for this mine is not good enough. We're not going to allow this unless you can show the whole ecosystem is going to be healthy afterwards. And the mining company didn't do that. So it doesn't say like no to all development and extraction, but it says yes, like nature has a right to be healthy, and they're going to critique some of these extractive projects more strongly now that this law's in place.
So the legal basis for these actions in Panama, Constitution, statutory, sorry if I'm in the weeds, but I'm just curious.
Oh, we're amongst lawyers here. This one was a national law,
Okay.
and constitutions the holy grail here. And so far, that's just Ecuador, but Aruba, the little island nation, is considering a constitutional amendment. A statute, can be more comprehensive than a constitutional amendment. Ideally, you'd have both the constitutional amendment and statutes to implement it in practice.
So talk to me about the global aspect a little bit. In conversations ahead of this webinar, we talked a bit about how you are certainly seeing more success outside of the US and in particular in South America, I believe. And you had some speculation, probably more than speculation, some thoughts on why that is the case.
Yeah, US is its own fun story we could talk about later, but definitely Latin America is the heart of this movement. Bolivia, national rights of nature law, Ecuador, constitution, as I mentioned, Panama, national law, Mexico, a bunch of states have rights of nature laws, Peru, court decisions, Colombia, over 15 court decisions on the rights of nature. And so it goes on and on. And actually, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 years, there's discussion of a rights of nature treaty in Latin America. And so to answer your question of why, there's a lot of reasons. One is, I think, the close cultural connection to nature, the idea of Pachamama, nature being alive. Definitely the strong indigenous presence there, and indigenous peoples worldwide have been leaders in the rights of nature movement, and that's true amongst the tribal nations in North America as well. I think a spirit of activism, and I know a lot of people are just activists in Latin America generally. They stand up for their rights. And then just, the Amazon is there, and like so much beauty and biodiversity that's under threat all the time from extractivism and mining companies, including from US and Canada and oil drilling companies. So it's kind of a front lines battle there, and they're looking for new legal tools to change the tides a little bit.
Now, do you see any oh, I saw balloons coming up in Mark's picture. I think he was applauding this. Do you oh, it's an Apple thing, Mark. I've had the same. Do you see any way that some of these concepts make their way to the US? Are you hopeful in any way? And if so, do you see a path?
I do. So the U.S., just to do a little bit of history here, a lot of these ideas came from the U.S. in a kind of formalistic sense. Many are based on indigenous understandings that nature is alive and should have a voice. And, if you interpret those ideas into law, it kind of looks like rights of nature sometimes. But there's a history here with Sierra Club versus Morton, a 50-year-old lawsuit in which the Supreme Court justice, in a dissent, losing opinion, said nature should have standing in court. So that was in the US, Justice Douglas. There was in 2002 that Navajo, the Diné, recognized the rights of Mother Earth and Father Sky in a codification of their beliefs. In 2006, Tamaqua Borough, Ohio, passed the Rights of Nature Ordinance. So all this stuff happened before Ecuador that I mentioned, which was that first big constitution. But it's slowed down a little bit in the U.S., whereas Latin America's boomed ahead. In the US, they've run into challenges from things like local governments doing rights of nature laws that are preempted by our regulatory national federal legal system that don't jive with the rights of nature, and some issues of laws that were too vague, and so they were hard to enforce. And so it slowed down a little bit, except for the tribal nations. There's about 7 tribal nations that have done rights of nature, and those are moving forward actually rapidly. But to answer your question, there was an era where the U.S. like had the best stuff. We had like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and Dangerous Species Act, and these were like revolutions of the legal system. The rivers were burning, and we cleaned those up in some ways, and species have a right to exist. And we kind of exported those. Other countries look to our stuff and learn from them, and they're replicated in a lot of ways worldwide. And now I think we need some humility to say, hey, look, these other countries are doing some really innovative stuff to give nature a voice, and we should learn from them. So I hope it happens. I think it'll happen at the state level as the short story in the US, and I think it requires learning from other countries that are a little bit ahead of us now.
Okay, we've sort of stumbled into your actions right now, and I'm going to go back to kind of the structure and some of the objectives broadly put of the Earth Law Center. But before we do that, as long as we're off track already, let me just ask: are there any specific initiatives going on inside the U.S. right now that are worthy of sort of forecasting or showcasing to this group?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of exciting initiative.
Give us a sampler.
Yeah, a couple to highlight. The rights of southern resident orcas is one I'm really excited about. Gail's helping us with that. Thanks, Gail. And southern resident orcas are subspecies of orcas that are adapted to live on salmon, and salmon are dwindling because the damming of rivers all over the Pacific Northwest, so they're going extinct. And we've worked on a campaign for years now to recognize their rights in Washington State, and about 8 towns have adopted proclamations in support of that. So that's a hopeful eventually a state level thing where we want the state to say orcas have rights, a right to exist, to free passage, to food sources, free flowing rivers that provide salmon and so forth. And that also ties into work with the Lummi Nation that believe orcas are their relatives and family members. And so it's kind of an existential threat to to their cultural and kinship ties with orcas.
Right.
There's actually a lot of states that are looking at rights of nature stuff, and a lot of states that are looking at anti-rights of nature stuff. 4 states have banned the rights of nature, and about 5 of them are considering pro-rights of nature legislation right now. New York, North Carolina with the rights of the Haw River. Let me see. Hawaii's proposed some legislation. Even Minnesota is talking about the rights of Manoomin right now at the state level. Bob, I know you're out
I
there.
did not know that. Really? Okay. I do
This
see that we have someone else on the call from Minnesota, and Karuna, I believe is the name. If you know anything about that, chime in, let us know. Okay, good. So let's back up now and talk just a little bit about Earth Law Center, kind of the framework that supports your work. Your mission statement from your website reads, Earth Law Center's mission is to advance ecocentric laws, policy, and governance for the well-being of the Earth community. Ecocentric laws is sort of a new term, to me anyway, and I think that is featured in the title of your casebook. Are there other players in this space that are advocating for an ecocentric legal framework that are worth mentioning here?
Yeah, definitely. And maybe just for the audience, I think ecocentric, you can kind of imply what it means, but anthropocentric is human-centered, and ecocentric, earth-centered. So what if all the law was based on our interconnection with nature and each other? There's a lot of players in this space. You'd be surprised. There's other NGOs. There's the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. There's this Eco Jurisprudence Monitor group that has a bunch of great case studies online. You can look on a map and click around to see where rights of nature stuff's happening. The Center for Earth Ethics is in New York, a cool group. Internationally, there's groups in different countries around the world. Lawyers for Nature in the UK, Defensa Ambiental in Chile. So you go to any country, there's a little rights of nature group there. And then there's governments. Bolivia's pushing this heavily on the world stage, and they're kind of doing so under the banner of something called Mother Earth Centric Actions and Harmony with Nature Law. And Harmony with Nature Law is the really big one where, in fact, this is interesting. for a long time, sustainable development was everything people were pushing for in the international stage, and they still kind of are in a lot of venues. But now, due in part to the leadership of Bolivia and other countries, at least in the Global Biodiversity Treaty, major international treaty, the framework they're pushing for is harmony with nature. Of course, we're going to develop, is that really like the best international goal? They say, no, like let's live in harmony with nature. So countries like Bolivia are pushing these frameworks internationally. United Nations Environment Program explores these topics. The IUCN has resolutions on rights of nature, including at the upcoming World Conservation Congress. So it goes on and on. There's, probably hundreds of groups involved in some way in the space, but probably only maybe, 30 to 40 full-time people working on Earth law, rights of nature stuff at the moment globally.
Good. Okay. So I mentioned to you when we talked ahead of time that I went through your strategic plan, and anyone on this call, I was having sort of a bad day today, and there are times for despair these days, and I found myself thumbing through your strategic plan, and I thought, there's hope. There's hope. That is a very impressive document that I would recommend to anyone on this call that they thumb through it if they're looking for trying to get a little feel about what the Earth Law Center is all about. And I'm going to ask you a few questions about that plan right now. So, after your mission, you describe how you operate. And I, kind of in my literal lawyer's mind, I like to connect the dots. And I saw three kind of prongs for your operating principles: advocacy, regional campaigns, education, and practice development. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and ask you for a short story around each of those. And let's start with advocacy. Give me a short story around one regional campaign that the Earth Law Center has been involved in that is a fun one to talk about.
Yeah, sounds good. There's so many interesting ones, but let me talk about this campaign in Africa. It's a little bit of a cliffhanger because it's right on the verge of success. So I think maybe in a couple months, folks can say, "Oh, Grant mentioned that," and they did it. There's a campaign down in Nigeria to recognize the rights of a river called the River Ethiop. It's in the Delta State, and as activists there, Iri Kefe Dafe has been working on it for 20 years, and about 7 years ago connected with Earth Law Center and has joined our team as our Africa lead and wanted to bring in a rights of nature element. So he's been going around to communities talking about the rights of this river, and its rights are really based similar to the one in Peru, the Marañón River I mentioned before, where he's advocating for a right for the river to flow freely, to be free from pollution, and so forth. And he's worked on proposed legislation called the Rights of the River Ethiop Act, that's being discussed now in the state legislative body there in the Delta State. And he's also collecting this, going town to town and working on putting together a guardianship body for the river. And I think this is really interesting because Africa is a place that has not done as much rights of nature work compared to other places. The exception is Uganda, where they have a national rights of nature law, but it kind of operates like a park system. It says we're designated, and they haven't really designated anywhere yet. And so the other interesting thing about this case in Nigeria is that it's going to be discussed in just about 14 days, April 22nd, at the United Nations, where they're having a big workshop on harmony with nature. And they're going to introduce advocates from around the world, and this case will be one of those explored there. So something to pay attention to, something where I think in the next 3 to 4 months, they're going to successfully pass legislation. And if you want to go online and learn more from all these advocates, including Iri Kefe Dafe, you can check out the UN Harmony with Nature program. So that's just one example, but we work in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, in North America, and a couple other regions.
So do you have a map with a bunch of pins in it on your wall? How do you keep track of all this? You are all over the globe, truly.
We're all over the globe. Yeah, working in about 25 countries. do I have a map with pins? I used to, and then it's 6 months would pass, and there'd be all these different
So
pins,
many
and I'm like,
pins. Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
had to.
Good. Okay, so another piece in your strategic plan talks about your collaborative services, and you mentioned I'm probably going to get it wrong, but there's a portal that you feature in a bit of your plan and on your website. Talk about your collaborative services and your Earth Law portal a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, so we're trying to make it easy for folks who want to get involved in these movements to do so. And so we starting to create a lot of template laws. And this was inspired by Rocket Lawyer. If you ever gone on there, you download a will or trust or something and template and fill it in. Da, 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 da. And we're like, oh, they
Yep.
should have that for all these earth-centered laws out there. So we're starting to develop this online resource. It's earthlawportal.org that has different interesting templates. And actually, one of the a new one up there is I'm really excited about was developed by a couple of folks through Third Act that we met through. And maybe I should just, before I run out of time, say that last summer, maybe a year ago, I reached out to Third Act because we have a whole program for retired lawyers, which I'll mention more about later. And I was looking for some help. And I was a little worried they're going to say, like, hands off our retired lawyers. They're busy. Like, get your own retired lawyer. Or late. I know it's late career and semi-retired lawyers, but they were so welcoming. They're like, yes, like how can we help you? Like we're going to send out notes to our network. And I was like I'm very excited by like how their mindset was just like we want to help you any way we can. And I thought that was really cool. So kudos to Third Act lawyers for just like being like, how can we help? Yes. Anyway, a couple of lawyers that we connected with created a template on zoning that's all about not just like what can you build and where, but incorporates reciprocity into the zoning. And so if you make a development, it's not just how can I build this? It's how can I give back to the land? It's a reciprocal relationship. And that's on the Earth Law portal, just to tie it back to that. So yeah, in addition to our legal services, we're looking to create resources so anyone can do their own rights of nature campaign. Anyone can give a voice to an ecosystem. Anyone can create new zoning rules that get back to nature, and those are all free and available online.
Great. And I would say that I think we have some people on the call that are active in their local Third Act chapters, the geographic chapters. And, there's some great resources here that you can bring to your local chapters for those local initiatives. And I recommend that you take a look at the portal. And I'm sure if you're in touch with Grant, he's happy to help. And Grant, I'll say that the Third Act lawyers, we are not a placement group, but we want to feature people like you that need help from lawyers like members of our group. And we encourage our members to take their own initiative and get in touch with these groups and find ways to help out. Last on how we operate, and then, well, you know what? I think I'm going to pause for a moment and do a few housekeeping things. And I know that we have some questions here. Um, uh, a group like yours needs money to operate. How do people make contributions to the Earth Law Center, Grant?
Well, thanks. Good question. Yeah, we've grown quite a bit, which is both fun and slightly stressful as the fundraiser, but that's part of the fun, I think, of
Mhm.
director. So yeah, we do our funding, if you're interested, comes from a mix of grants and individual donations. That's pretty much all of it. But you can donate online at earthlawcenter.org/donate. That's appreciated. Also signing up for our class, it's the standard price is $495. That's a great way to kind of show support and get something back, some more training in ecocentric law. We also take in-kind donations, and there's other ways to support us in addition to cutting a check. So yeah, check out earthlawcenter.org/donate, and you can learn more there about all this stuff.
Good. We can't forget that. Mark, let's go to a few questions, and then I think Grant has a few concluding remarks. But are you prepared to put a few questions to him?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you both for the discussion so far. Let's start with Howard Sharfstein. You had a couple questions. The first one was interesting. Is the role of is there a potential role for contract law here? And maybe Howard, if you're on, you can just maybe get off mute and ask your questions and bring your perspective to this. That would be great if you're willing to do that. not, I will, which is fine. So Howard's question was, in thinking about your table comparing common law and earth law, do you see a role for contract law to value and enforce covenants that support regenerative natural climate solutions as a way to support ecosystem health and vitality? So it's sort of the role of contract law in this. I know you mentioned a lot of other areas of law. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I've not done a deep dive into contract law. I guess the one place I'm looking at right now that has a lot of similarities is our rights of nature easements, which I think are essentially kind of like a contract between a landowner and a land trust that regulates how you treat the land. And actually, another third act lawyer is helping me with this. A lot of folks are interested in replicating something very similar to the rights of nature in jurisdictions where there is no rights of nature law on the books. And they're landowners, and they say, "Hey, look, I want my like willow trees to have rights, and I want there's a wetland where I live, and I want it to have rights." And I'm like, "Well, you can kind of get close to that if you do a rights of nature easement. You create an easement that restricts how you can develop and treat the land, but also can create affirmative obligations to promote biodiversity and respect the ecosystem. And you can create an easement that has elements of the rights of nature in that easement. And we're also looking at rights of nature trusts, where there's trusts or land trusts whereby the trustees are ecosystems. It can be like the decision makers on the trust. It can be like a wetland, and there's a proxy for a wetland, and it can be birds, and there's a proxy for birds. And this builds from our work to put nature on a board of directors for the first time at this group called Faith in Nature, along with another. We partnered on that with a group called Lawyers for Nature. Shout out. So all of which is to say that's kind of a contractual,
Yeah.
like a land contract that we are looking at. Beyond that, I think
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
oh yeah, it took me a few minutes. I'm using my phone and to get off mute. And the reason I wanted to focus your attention there is because you know property law, and I appreciate your reflections on contract law. I had met you at Climate Week in New York and talked to you about this carbon conservation trust that I'm active in. So what I wanted to steer the question in the direction of is whether through contract law we could get valuations to compete for protecting nature, to compete with the extractive industries by having some valuation of the ecosystem for its own rights and for its services, and using that intersection of easements and covenants for contract law to enforce in the way that the that the that extractive industries use mineral rights to have nature rights as a way to take property law and intersect it with contract law in a protective manner. That was where I was trying to steer the question and recognizing valuing life under contract and protecting it through enforceable contract means.
Cool. Well, it's a good question. There's some challenges to work through, so we should keep talking about it. I will say in some places where there's a formal guardianship body, like the Wanganui River in Aotearoa, New Zealand, has guardians. They explicitly, per a treaty settlement, can enter into contract agreements and have the guardianship body on behalf of the river. So that's a thing already. Which is cool, very explicitly. Some of the stuff on the valuation of nature gets into complex questions of like, nature has rights. Should we also put a value on it, or do we need to just recognize its intrinsic value? And I think people are moving towards like understanding there's some nuance there where you can blend nature's rights, but also acknowledge that it does have, immense innumerable value to all life on the planet. And maybe that can be a mechanism to essentially secure large amounts of financial resources owned by nature. So it can be, a player in this global politics game. Imagine if nature had trillions of dollars in a bank account for these agreements. So yeah, there's a lot there, but also some tension with this putting a value on nature that still is to be explored. So I'd be interested to explore that with you more at some point, Howard.
Thanks, Howard.
Thank you. Appreciate your answer.
Interesting question from Catherine Smith. Or is the sort of, it seems like you're making the hope of making progress in the U.S. is understandably going to be at the state level, getting things in state constitutions and things like that. But as we all know, nature doesn't respect state boundaries, and how do you navigate that? And I can use the analogy, you can't if you pee in one part of the pool, the whole pool is polluted. So it was good analogy, Catherine. But it's applies to rivers, obviously. How do you get around that in the U.S. in particular, where you have this a lack of hope at the federal level of anytime anything happening anytime soon, and yet these ecosystems and the things you're trying to protect typically cross state boundaries.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that. One is that you can look to Latin America, where parts of the Amazon had rights in different court cases. There was, rights of nature in Ecuador and parts of the Amazon, the court case in Colombia on rights of the Amazon and so forth. And now there's a movement to say, hey, should we create a treaty on the rights of the whole Amazon collectively? So you can start somewhere and build up to something larger. That's one approach. Another, movement is the bioregionalism has kind of had a resurgence recently, and there's a lot of talk of bioregional governance, of also bioregional finance, and there's little startup groups or maybe big startup groups that are exploring these concepts. Like you can look at Salmon Nation Labs is one online where the Salmon Nation is anywhere the salmon swim to on the Pacific coast, and so it's kind of similar to Cascadia in some ways. And their argument is that, and I agree, we should be governing based on bioregions, or if not bioregions, then watersheds. And there are movements to create governance based on these areas that make sense because, if we're doing what I said at the beginning, Earth Law Center does align human laws with the laws of nature. It makes no sense to have arbitrary political boundaries governing nature in this patchwork framework. And that's exactly what's wrong with a lot of environmental laws, is this patchwork approach where there's different states and then you regulate the river separate from the forest that's right next to the river that you can log, even though the river's protected. So what's that about? So yeah, I think, we eventually, in an ideal world, you do have bioregions that are governed based on the bioregions, but it's going to take some work to get there.
Question I want to make sure that you hit before we're done is the slippery slope comment you made earlier, which is, it seems to me a lot of people, their knee-jerk reaction to this whole area of law would be like, oh my God, we have enough litigation in this country already. I'm talking from a U.S. perspective, but now you have a tree in my backyard bringing a lawsuit. Like, come on, people. So like, how do you get past that stumbling block? It sounds like you're aware of it and you can talk to it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I don't, sugarcoat it. There's stuff to think carefully about, and you need careful legal drafting and good lawyers working on this stuff to avoid that sort of thing. But a couple general points are, one, I think you can look to the human environmental rights movement as an analogy. And for example, Montana has in its constitution, as a lot of folks know, the right to a healthful and clean environment and for present and future generations. And that's been around for, 50 years. And that didn't result in like lawsuits, thousands of lawsuits from young people all the time. It eventually built up to like one big landmark lawsuit brought by, young people, our Children's Trust, that resulted in a change to how they considered climate change under environment impact assessments. And so I think you can say the same thing with rights of nature, where there'll be a small number of landmark decisions on major environmental threats. And that's kind of what we've seen in Ecuador, where it's been, on the books for 15 years, and there's a couple big cases a year. So there's that. I think you need careful legal drafting, though, nonetheless, about, what rises to the level of a rights violation, for example. What does it mean to, cut down one tree? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about things that impair the health of entire systems. It's like rights of nature is agnostic to one mosquito or one fly or one mouse. It's more about the whole system. But I think that needs to be reflected in legal drafting. So yeah, there are issues to work through. But again, I think that's why you need sophisticated lawyers and judicial training to handle these issues. And it's nothing the legal system can't deal with, if you have that level of sophistication.
Another question we had from Will Carroll, just about how do your priorities align, and how do you collaborate with the advocates working to recognize the legal rights of non-human animals? You mentioned that previously with the orcas. I mean, you're involved with the work that Gail and others are helping out with the southern orcas. resident orchids. How close are those areas of law and development, and how closely is that collaboration happening? And what are the sort of are there notable differences between the two?
Yeah, and the collaboration with different groups, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah. And
focus on animals versus the environment. It's all, I mean, it's all part of nature, but I just how do you reconcile those two things, and are they really just very close in terms of the creativity going on and the theories being pursued?
yeah, and let me say one last thing about the U.S. slippery slope, and then answer that. There are jurisdictions that have passed rights of nature laws that I think are too aggressive for what powers they have, and those have been overturned in court. So, just to say that in the U.S. people have tested the lines and crossed them a little bit in the past, and I think we're learning to where the right balance is right now. For the orcas, that gets to a question of animal rights versus rights of nature in some senses. There's an animal rights movement that says kind of every animal has a right. Sometimes that right is because they're kind of like a human. They feel emotion and pain and have families and so forth. And so they should have rights for the same reasons humans have rights. And that's a different approach than the rights of nature. And even with orcas, where it's about the rights, not of each orca individually per se, but the whole population has a right to exist. And it's more about a species. So there is some interplay there. And yeah, if each individual animal has rights, there could be more litigation potentially, but there's also ways to work through that, I think. And that gets to this other issue that maybe people have asked about of where if nature has rights, what if its rights, interfere with each other? And that gets to balancing rights where, we're balancing rights all the time. Our rights are constantly in tension with each other. Courts make decisions about how those rights balance out or are resolved. And oftentimes those decisions are to err towards what's in the best interest of society, or in this case, what's in the best interest of the larger community of life is how a court would resolve tensions between human rights, nature's rights, and nature's rights, and so forth.
Thank you. One more question, and then we can close up since we're getting close on time. You mentioned how important statutory law, constitutional amendments are to this movement around the world and in the U.S. Are there also theories, in common law that can be brought to bear, or does this really require sort of a legislative foundation of some sort for this to move forward?
I think there is a basis in common law, things like torts, things like habeas corpus is something people have used for trying to free chimpanzees and elephants from confinement. That's more of an animal rights approach. That they got pretty close. I think they got 4-2 loss in the highest court in New York towards freeing an elephant happy from a zoo using habeas corpus. You can imagine using habeas corpus maybe to try to free a river that's been buried underneath a city. Hey, why not? If that river has rights, shouldn't it be freed as well, just like a person from imprisonment? So there is some common law strategy. That being said, all jurisdictions globally have seemed willing to extend rights, infer rights of nature from current rights that do exist already. And so, where human environmental rights exist in Spain, they've inferred rights of nature as an extension of that, same as in Colombia. So I think you can hope for, whole new common law victories, but also you can look at what's on the books, and there can be this understanding that, hey, we're part of nature and we have rights. And so isn't that enough in some cases for a judge to say nature has rights as well based on current statutory or constitutional law?
Thank you, Grant. I'll turn it back to you, Bob and Grant, for closing comments. And I think we're getting close to the hour.
Great. Mark, thanks for the synthesis. Not easy to do of the many questions that we've had. And Grant, thank you for these in thoughtful replies. There is so much to think about in connection with your work. Before we're done, I just have to say that it is Manoomin wild rice in Minnesota that does have has been deemed to have legal rights. And Karuna, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Thank you for adding that in the comments section. Grant, you had some information about potential fellowships or training.
Yeah, let me mention that. If I could just do 10 seconds on the hubris of giving nature legal rights, because I so agree with that. I feel like there is a lot of hubris in that. And just to say our long-term vision is to move outside of this Eurocentric rights-based challenge altogether. Because I agree, forcing nature into this arbitrary rights-based legal system, like long-term doesn't make sense, but
Let me
short.
interrupt you. Anyone that's interested in this thread, go to the intended outcomes section
Yeah.
of the strategic plan, and it is a fascinating set of bullet points about the long game that Grant and company are playing that isn't about, amending a statute. It is about looking at the way we regulate our relationship with the world in a different way. Because all of this junk that we do is made up by us, and we collectively have the power to change it. None of this happens quickly. So forgive the soapbox. Back to you, Grant.
No, it's okay. I think that's an important point. So yeah, surprise announcement is that Earth Law Center has a fellowship for late career attorneys, and a couple folks here have done it, can tell you about it. You have to be in Durango, Colorado, and we're going to open up 2 more spots for it. What you do is you learn a little bit about rights of nature and Earth law, and you already have. And then you show up in Durango, and it's basically a week-long legal clinic where we're going to have about 4 or 5 cases to help advance rights of nature, Earth law, and practice. For folks who don't want to do the legal work, you can help with our textbook, but you're in person, you come to our office, you work with your fellows, and the folks from last summer have a special relationship that's ongoing. And so I wanted to invite 1 or 2 folks from Third Act would be welcome to submit their information online if you're interested in coming out. Let me put the information in the chat so you can apply if you're interested. It's May 11th to 18th, 2025. So coming up here. So someone who's spontaneous and wants to go on a road trip to beautiful Colorado, here's all the details.
Great, and I will get something up on our website that on that sometime in the next day or 2. And I also I want to mention another webinar that is upcoming. But Grant, do we have anything to close with here?
Just to say, Warren can answer your questions about that fellowship because he came out and had a special experience last year. But no, just thank you so much. Thank you for Third Act's hospitality and generosity since I've known you the last couple of years, and appreciate your time today.
And thank you for yours. Really appreciate your time and your very important work. I need to mention that we have another webinar coming up on May 22nd, and it will be, I think, featuring one of our members, Will Carroll, and it will be about solar permitting. This is the blocking and tackling that has to be done. Will has spent a lot of time on I believe it's model legislation that can be rolled out in states that allows for automated solar permitting for residential solar, a very important component of our energy work. Pat, any closing words from you?
If there's anything I could add, this has been really fascinating and enjoyable. I want to just thank you both, thank all of you for being here, and I guess that's it. Have a lovely rest of your day, evening.
Great. Take care, all. Bye.
Everyone.